Let's talk about some of the other pages of other parts of our HTML pages that we haven't talked about much so far. So far we've concentrated more on the body. And now the body is where all the content is concentrated, where what we see on the page is coded. So if I create a header here, I'll do an H1, this is a header, then this header would appear on my page. Now the head of the document isn't to be confused with header elements. The head of the page is that part of my HTML web page that has extra information that the browser needs to know in order to display our web pages correctly. Now one of those is the title, so I'm going to call this extra markup elements. We're going to talk about several other extra markup elements, most of them in the head, that we need to know going forward in our HTML. Now anytime we have an HTML web page, we might have lots and lots of content, lots of tags, lots of code, lots of things mixed in together. And it's important to keep things organized, clean, and separate. Now one of the most effective ways of creating organized content is to add comments to our HTML web pages. Now comments are very convenient in the sense that I can type anything I want in this HTML file and the comments will not be displayed by the browser. So if I save this, I'll save this as a new folder. I'll call it extra markup. Save it as index. So now if I view this in Google Chrome, of course there's my header, which is what I have right there. Now I'm going to write a comment. This is a comment and it will not appear on my web page. Now to make this a comment, I need to create a certain, I need to write the following before and after the comment. Less than, exclamation, and you'll see that as soon as I do that, less than, exclamation, dash dash, that opens the comment, and in order to close the comment, dash dash, greater than. So now it's been grayed out. That is a comment. If I save this and preview it in my browser, we see there it does not appear. So I could have any comment here that I needed. For example, a reminder to change this later. Please change this later. Or it could be a message to somebody else that might be looking at my code. Anything that you need to create a comment on for yourselves or for other coders, go ahead and do it. There's no limit to the amount of commenting you can have as long as it's preceded by that and it's ended by that. So comments are very, very important. Now let's look at the top of our page here. Let's look at this here. This long string of characters here. This is basically what's called the doc type declaration. And what it does is the doc type declaration tells the browser which version of HTML the page is using. And the browser needs to know that in order to display elements correctly. Now there are several different versions of HTML. This one here is the transitional. And you can see there because it says XHTML transitional. XHTML was a variation of HTML. Now we're not going to go into the history of it. That can be found online. You can find it in your book. What you need to understand is that this creates the correct doc type declaration. If I go to File, New, click HTML, you'll see here I can select the doc type. And I'm going to click I'm going to try HTML5, which is the latest version of HTML. And I'm going to create it. And you'll see that the doc type declaration in HTML5 is far simpler. Okay? Let me go ahead and create a new one. Let's try HTML4 transitional. And again, it creates a different doc type declaration. My recommendation is to use HTML4 transitional, or better yet, HTML5. HTML5 is backwards compatible, and we should start creating all of our pages with the HTML5 doc type declaration. It doesn't mean that we have to use HTML5 elements, but it is a good idea to use the HTML5 doc type declaration. So that's what the doc type does. It tells the browser what version of HTML we are using. Now another important thing, let me go back to my original document here, are class and ID attributes. Now we've talked about attributes being that extra information that goes inside of our tag. Remember, for example, if we have an anchor, the href here is the attribute. So http://www.google.com, close quote. So this is my HTML element, this is the attribute. There are many, many different types of attributes. Now there are two types of very special attributes called global attributes. And those are the ID attribute and the class attribute. The reason that these are so important is going to become very evident as soon as we get into CSS, which is coming right up. Now, IDs and classes are then called global attributes because we can assign them to any element in our web page, in our HTML. So for example, I'm going to give this header an ID. ID equals, and then I can christen it or baptize it with any name that I want. I'll call it main header, close quotes. The reason that this is important is if I wanted to do something specific with this header later on, like style it with a certain font or lay it out in a certain way, I can then target that only that particular header with CSS, meaning that if I had another header, it would not be affected by any styling that's applied to a header with an ID matching main header. The same thing can be said about the class attribute. The class attribute is class equals, I'll call this subheader. Now a class can be applied to many elements and on one page at a time. The ID is like a person's name. It should only be used once per page. Now a class is something that can be applied an unlimited amount of time. So I could give it to my anchor, for example. Now it wouldn't make sense to call an anchor a subheader, but it's just to illustrate that I can give a class, the same class, to multiple elements within my HTML page. Whereas the ID, it's a good idea to keep only one element with that idea. An ID is like a unique name, like your own name. So there's only one of you, whereas a class you can say, well, my name is Jonathan and I'm 6 feet tall. So there's a lot of people who can be classified as being 6 feet tall or from the state of Florida or any other similar thing. Now, another important thing we have to distinguish in our HTML, and this is very important. Now, let me go ahead and delete this. And by the way, IDs and classes are going to be used a lot in CSS, and they will make sense very shortly. But I just wanted to introduce them because there's things that we need to understand. So just to recap, IDs and classes are global attributes. Global attributes means that they can be assigned to any HTML element. Now the other thing that's important to talk about is inline versus block level elements. Now let me show you something. I'm going to create some anchors. Sorry, I'm misspelling that. Now, I'm going to copy this, paste it below a couple more times, save this, and preview in the browser. Now you notice that even though they're not on the same line here, they appear on the same line here. Anchors are an example of what are called inline elements, and inline elements just basically means that they appear on the same line. Images and anchors are examples of inline elements. Now let me go ahead and give this last one. I'm going to wrap this link in a paragraph, just like that, and I'm going to refresh my page. And you see that that last link now appears below because it's been wrapped inside of a paragraph, and a paragraph is a block level element, meaning that each new instance of a block level element will start on a new line. Those are simplifications of it, but it is important to distinguish between inline elements and block level elements because it's something that we will be talking about a lot.